Good morning, everybody. I've got it as 11 o'clock now, so we're going to officially start. I just want to say welcome. We are so glad you're here for today's presentation, Designing, Permitting, and Building Trails and the Story of the Wild Cherry Orchard Trail. So it's going to be a wonderful presentation. We have our two guest speakers today, including Dan Bell, who is our Land Trust Director. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Renee Tkach, who has been managing the Gorge Towns to Trails program for many years now. And so she's going to be telling about the specifics. Dan will give the big overview. Renee's going to give the specific on that trail. And then we have Elizabeth Brooke Wilbanks in the background because she is making this magic happen. So thank you all for being here, and thanks to you all for making this presentation possible. I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Great. Thank you, Pam, and good morning to everybody out there. Hope you're doing well. I'm up here in our Hood River office, a place where we usually don't have a problem getting wind, but boy, we would love some wind soon. So I wanted to, Renee and I are going to tell you a little bit about the story of the Wild Cherry Orchard Trail. I'm going to give you a little background and history, and then I'll turn it over to Renee, who will talk about the most recent efforts to expand our public trail out at Wild Cherry Orchard. As always, if you have any questions, you can just type them into the chat box, and we will get to them at some point during the presentation. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A. Just really stepping back, all of our trail projects are couched under the umbrella of the Gorge Towns to Trails concept. Conceptually, this is the idea of public hiking trails that go the entire length of the gorge on both sides of the river and connect between recreation areas and community areas, providing about a 200-mile loop trail when it's all done. This is a very long-term project, and that's for a lot of reasons, some of which are land ownership, hiker and pedestrian safety. Funding is always a big one. But really one of the core things and what we hope to relay to you today is that it's really a challenge because each and every segment of a vision like this is an individually permitted and built trail. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of time, to build every segment. So as we move forward, while we're trying to build this larger vision, we're doing it in the context of individual trails at individual places, trying to make connections both between communities and recreation areas, as well as between recreation areas themselves. Lisle Cherry Orchard, I suspect most of you are pretty familiar with it. It's of course here, the town of Lisle, over on the Washington County, on the Washington side. Lisle Cherry Orchard is our largest preserve at about 550 acres. We took ownership of most of that in around 2009. It's one of two properties that we have open for public access with a developed trail, the other being Mosier Plateau. Number of reasons why Lisle Cherry Orchard is just a special place beyond the trail. Just its sheer size and connectivity to adjacent public lands provides tremendous habitat for Oregon white oak and the very important grasslands that we see out at Lisle Cherry Orchard. Unlike what you see in some of the western parts of the gorge, big oak trees, these tend to have a much harder life out there, tend to be a little more scraggly, a little bit more of smaller trees and bigger patches of grasslands. Lisle Cherry Orchard also has these fantastic wildflower displays every spring that attract people from not only the region, but really internationally to our trail. It's very popular, and we get a lot of inquiries during the spring about visiting Lisle Cherry Orchard. And it's also, again, because of its size, a very important place for wildlife. This is a peregrine falcon. One of the things we'll be talking about kind of throughout this conversation. But particularly the scree slopes, the cliff habitats provide opportunities for not only peregrine falcons, but things like rattlesnakes and other wildlife that really need that sort of an environment to thrive. And finally, there's a real community connection with Lisle Cherry Orchard. You can see our property sits right outside the town of Lisle, and our property and the trail system does provide a recreational amenity, a place of to get away for area residents. And we'll talk a little about connections into that community during Renee's presentation, but it certainly is an asset to the community of Lisle. This is the trail itself. Oops, sorry, twitchy finger. Just as way of background, I mentioned earlier that every trail project is a project in and of itself. In the National Scenic Area, any trail development is considered a major development, meaning it goes through the same permitting process with all the same components that, say, a large building development or house development might go through. That includes a number of things. Everything on this list is a necessary component of a trail development project. And those many items that you see shown in green are all things you have to do before you even submit your application. They're pieces that need to go into your application packet itself. And you can see the number of things that we need to do range from surveying our boundaries, looking at wildlife, plant, botanical, cultural, scenic impacts to the key viewing areas. A trail, if you can imagine seeing a trail from across the river, it does have a scenic impact, and we try to minimize that impact so that you can't necessarily see the trail from other places in the gorge. We need to address wildfire response, soil stability. Geotechnical is a soil stability. And then and only then can we start to actually design exactly where on the ground is this trail going to go? Where are we going to start to put signage? And once we know that, we can start to look at grading and how much soil movement do we have? And certainly the more soil you move, the more rigorous the permitting requirements go. With all that, we can finally submit a permit application. This typically goes to the county, with the exception of Klickitat County, where it goes to the Gorge Commission. That's a process that can take a long time as they go through review. They get comment from both public agencies, other stakeholders, as well as the general public. Eventually issue you a permit, and only then, after a couple of years at best, are you actually starting to build a trail and thinking about your signage and installing that sort of stuff. So it's quite a process, and all of this stuff costs money. And so part of the reason that it is a challenge to build a lot of new trail projects is just the sheer resource investment it takes along the way. As we start to talk about the Lisle Cherry Orchard and the public trail there, prior to 1995, there was a user-created trail on the property. It kind of was just a scramble that went right up the hillside. But in 1995, Bruce and Nancy Russell started the process to kind of more formally develop and permit the first trail at Lisle Cherry Orchard. They did that in 1995 and then came back in 1998 and did a reroute, because what they did is they had a permit, and as they built that trail, they didn't necessarily follow all of the things they said in the permit, and actually were the subject of an enforcement action by the Gorge Commission. So that 1998 reroute was an effort to kind of bring it back into compliance with the permits, as well as deal with some on-the-ground issues. When you're building the trail on the ground, the topography, the route, a lot of that stuff really gets fine-tuned during construction. It's one thing to say on paper what you're intending to do. It's an entirely different thing to have a skilled trail builder out there looking at the ground, thinking about the topography, erosion, pedestrian traffic, and actually building. That first trail was essentially about a 2.5 mile, one way in, one way out, shown here in orange. The yellow is our property boundary in the town of Lisle over here to the west. And largely that was the trail for the next 15 years or so. There were a couple of small reroutes. The Chinook Trails Association led an effort in 2008, 2009, and 2010 to do some rerouting, again, trying to deal with soil stabilization, erosion control. Along the way there in December 2009, the Friends of Columbia Gorge Land Trust actually took ownership of the Lyle Trail. So we were working with the Chinook Trails Association during the when we took ownership, there was a tenant with a life estate. That means a person who can stay on the property, live on the property for the duration of their life. And so that tenant, this was their homestead that was on our property up until 2012. And so when that person passed away and that life estate was extinguished, is the legal term, we were finally able to kind of clean up the rest of our preserve. And just note kind of this set of trees here, just for orientation as I take you to kind of the after in 2012 as we completed that cleanup and the rehabilitation of that site. You can see a fair amount of stuff that ended up needed to be removed. Once this was done, we really started to set the stage for another conversation about an expansion of the Lyle Cherry Orchard Trail. And I'm about to turn it over to Renee to pick up in 2013, but wanted to just finally say in 2017, as part of the Preserve the Wonder campaign, we did pick up another 25 acres, the Lyle Peak property, which was kind of an essential piece for some of our trail plans. And of course, many of you were contributors to the Preserve the Wonder campaign, and we appreciate that. And it was a really important acquisition for the trail work. I'm about to turn it over to Renee. Do we have any questions that have come up?
We do.
Okay.
We do. From Francie, she was asking, with the cultural resources inventory, how wide an area beyond the trail itself or just the footprint of the trail?
It's a great question. All of those surveys that I referenced are of the entirety of the property. We can go in with a conceptual idea of where we want the trail to go, but we really need to have a survey of the entire property to make sure that we identify whether it's a cultural resources issue, an endangered plant, an endangered animal. Those are the fine tuning of the trail route that happen after all of those assessments are done. So in the case of all of them, we're doing assessments of our entire ownership, and sometimes even off of our ownership, depending on what we're talking about. Wildlife don't necessarily follow property boundaries. So
That's true.
That's an example.
All right, great. Thank you, Dan.
Okay. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Renee now. And I'll go away and be back for the Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Dan. This is Renee, and I'm coming to you from our Washougal office on the Washington side. And I can see the sun is trying to poke out, so that's encouraging for today. Yesterday was probably one of our worst days out here. So I'm going to get us started with my PowerPoint here. Bear with me. All right. All right, so now we're going to talk about how the next generation of this trail is born. In 2012, thanks to 2 anonymous major donors, we were able to begin planning our second Gorge Towns to Trails project at the Lyle Cherry Orchard. To expand the existing 2.5-mile trail that Dan was just talking about into a bigger system and try to connect it into town. We began our trail expansion journey by applying for a National Park Service Recreation Trails Conservation Grant. That did not provide money, but instead it provided technical support by facilitating community outreach through a person that was assigned by the National Park Service. And what that really allowed us to do was not have friends actually lead that conversation about what the community wanted for for a trail expansion, or what could the town really envision for a potential connection, and really making it a community asset like Dan was talking about. And during this 2-year period, many meetings and workshops and planning efforts were taking place. Some were supportive, but there was a small group that had concerns and conflict with basically anything that Friends did. And as you can see in this one room here, or this one photo here, that's a lot of people to show up for the small town of Lisle. That really made up, that crew was really made up of both supporters and folks that had concerns, and also trust issues about what was going to happen in their backyard. We did weekly scouting trips that included locals and trail builders to look at potential routes. We really scoured all of the little nooks and crannies of that 500 acres and adjacent lands owned by the Department of Natural Resources. We were lucky enough that they are our neighbor, and I'll show you a map here shortly that shows that proximity. And in the beginning, the Lisle High School was on board to be the town trailhead and supported the project unanimously. So we got to work. The local planning group and friends developed a vision map for proposed trails. And just to orient you with this map, this quadrant up here that's encircled in red, that is the Department of Natural Resource property. And if you've ever hiked the Lisle Cherry Orchard, you get to a junction where you either turn right and go into the cherry orchard, or if you were to go left, it would actually lead you up into the DNR, or Department of Natural Resources land that is actually open for folks to wander and hike, mountain bike, horseback ride up there. And there is actually, they do allow hunting up there too. So this map shows you where the group of folks that were really dedicated to trying and determine where trails could possibly be placed. You can see that we really had a pretty extensive vision of where those could live. But before we could nail down a final trail plan, we had to investigate the routes to see if they didn't compromise wildlife, plant life, or scenic values. So we hired professionals to conduct wildlife, botanical, and cultural resource surveys, and to see if our routes impacted any of these resources. And these really, I chose these photos because these were the main pieces of each one of these surveys that really were being studied. This Macanella oregano is this tiny little flower, and it's not the most spectacular picture of it, but I wanted to show you the scale. This is a tiny, tiny little flower, but it is on the endangered species list. And Lisle Cherry Orchard is a wonderful host for it. It loves that landscape. It loves a very scoured kind of landscape. It actually also really likes where animal trails are placed. It likes disturbed soil. So it really did dictate where we could place our trails, as well as the peregrine falcon that, as Dan mentioned, we have great habitat for the falcon that live along the cliffs that go down to the Columbia River. And
Hey,
then,
Renee.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could make those pictures a little bit bigger so people could fully appreciate the falcon and the flowers, because if you could take it to the full screen.
Oh, you don't see full screen. Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, let me try and, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Okay, and then I have things popping up. I'm sorry because this is my first webinar and I'm using technology here. So I'm going to take it and try, I hope this helps here. All right, so does that make it bigger? I hope so.
It does.
Seem to get rid of this note section.
It's fine. It's good.
Okay. I hope this makes it a little bigger for you all. So these are beautiful photos. This last one is the Convict Road Camp. And if for those of you that have ever hiked the Lisle Cherry Orchard, the Convict Road was built by convicts, and it was an experiment to see if Sam Hill could build his dream road. That ended up being the historic Columbia River Highway. And this camp was actually located on the Lisle Cherry Orchard property that Friends owns way before we owned it. But this was a great photo that shows you all what that camp looked like. And those were historic and are cultural resources. I am wondering if I'm going to take a moment just to try and escape this screen that I have two screens up, and I want to make it bigger for you all. So just one moment. Okay, I think that helps. Let's see here. All right. So
You've got it.
all right, thank you. And thank you all for being patient with me. So next we had to look at analyzing those scenic impacts that the trail could actually really affect. And so I wanted to show this photo here first that shows looking across from the Rowena Plateau. And you can see here's the town of Lisle, here's the Lisle sign, and here are the cliffs that you actually climb up from over here and end up being out over here in the cherry orchard. But the new Lisle Loop that you'll see in a moment on a next map that was being visioned for development as a trail is actually planned to go under this Lisle sign. And as you all can see from this photo, that is a challenge to make it so that you cannot see it from what Dan referred to earlier as those key viewing areas, which include Rowena Plateau, the Columbia River, the historic Columbia River Highway, and so forth. And what we also had challenges to really try and find the perfect routes to allow us to access more of the Lisle Cherry Orchard was trying to create a grading plan. And this is this map right here. And this takes a lot of technical design that we worked with our Washington Trails Association partners as well as in-house to develop this. And the green is where it's really easy grades and easy to really hide a trail because of the topography. But here is this red section, and that's right in this area under the Lisle sign. So we really had to find any little like spot in the topography that could actually like berm and hide that that trail, so that it didn't seem like a giant scar on the from other views. So in the beginning, we determined that through those surveys that we really, we were looking at where those trailheads could live. And as I said earlier, the high school was on board, the board was on board. And so we had an entrance here to the high school that I'm circling with my cursor. And then we also had another entrance, which is at the end of what's called Balfour Street. And that's down here where this little circle is, where that property, that Life Estate lived until we removed that. Unfortunately, because there was a very few and a minority voice of, and minority I mean by very few people in the community that were resistant for those connections, especially into the school. So the school felt the pressure to actually rescind their support for a trailhead at the time. And so we ended up having to remove this trailhead option. And then we went and we met with the county because this is under county jurisdiction, this Balfour Road. And because of some of the constraints that they were providing, that in terms of concerns over the street's ability to provide a safe experience for those that lived on there, and as well as those traveling to the trailhead, it became unfeasible actually to use that, and actually unaffordable really to be able to build a trailhead at the Balfour site at this time. So this is what we ended up designing and where we are today. This is the existing trailhead here, where if you've hiked the Lisle Cherry Orchard, this is where you would start. But the blue, and the blue is the existing trail, as you can see. And then this little light blue section is where we actually decommission. And I used to call this area right here that we decommissioned used to be my most unfavorite part of the trail experience back before it was decommissioned. It was where those little ball-bearing pebbles were that were quite terrifying when you were descending down that section. Well, we've gotten rid of that. and with our partners at Washington Trails Association, who are really the force and that strong partnership, because Friends of the Columbia Gorge, we're not trail builders. That is not our expertise. So thank goodness we have groups like Washington Trail Association to help us not only design these, but build them. And so this is where they just completed this new section called the Lyle Loop, or the Cherry Loop. And they started this spring to start the Lyle Loop. So we weren't done yet. We couldn't start building. So I got a little ahead of myself on that last slide. But before we could build, we had to apply for a National Scenic Area permit. Like Dan talked about before, it is considered a large scale development. And it took us almost 7 years of those public meetings, the surveys, truthing the trails, designing them, the grading plans, all of that. And finally, in 2018, we had a permit approved. So we get to start building on this trail. And despite the fact that we don't have these connections into town, and being the Gorge Towns to Trails project manager, that was a big disappointment for us. But that doesn't mean that we haven't continued conversations with the community to still explore opportunities to be able to have that connection one day. But for now, we are permitted for a trail system that does not connect into town yet. So here we are, well, not we, here are Washington Trails Association volunteers pre-COVID, because they don't have masks on, building that new Cherry Loop that was completed in the spring of 2020. So I encourage you all to get out there once the smoke passes and fall kicks in. It's a beautiful, beautiful trail that takes you to wonderful new views and vistas, and a really great new lunch spot also. And I encourage you all to stay tuned for upcoming work parties that Washington Trails Association will be leading. You can be an expert trail builder, or you can be someone that's never picked up a shovel or any tool to build a trail. There's always something to do for everyone. So it's a great experience. It's great camaraderie, and what a wonderful legacy to leave behind or be part of, and building this trail that'll be around for generations. I wanted to share this photo because now we are in COVID, during COVID-19, and that is affecting our ability to actually get this trail done. Our goal was to have this trail done by the end of 2020, but obviously we've got some obstacles that we've had to overcome. In the spring, we had shut down all work parties because of COVID-19, and our organization, Washington Trails Association, along with other trail organizations, came up with some wonderful protocols to really make people feel safe while they're still out there volunteering. And so this is a picture of a physically distanced lunch happening during a work party. Everyone's sitting apart. What a different experience, because normally we're all huddled together, we're sharing food, we're sharing stories, but it's still pretty magical to get out there and be together in this way. We've had to reduce work parties to 6 people or less, but we're getting it done. And there are over 6 work parties scheduled actually for this fall. So we hope to have this trail done in early 2021. So now that we're starting to think about the Lyle Cherry Orchard project completing, we get to look across the river towards the Dalles and start a trail planning process on Friends Mount Olka Land Trust Preserve. And so this is a photo of one of our donors, and out there exploring this Mount Olka Preserve last spring, or no, actually the spring before. And you can see this is the big Google plant, and down here is the Discovery Center. And so the idea is to connect a trail. The conceptual idea is to connect a trail from the Discovery Center, which actually is connected to the Riverfront Trail, up to this beautiful Mount Olca Land Trust Preserve. So please stay tuned on this opportunity, because we are in the beginning of all of those feasibility surveys that I talked about that we did for the Lyle Cherry Orchard. And then I want to close it with, when you're ready to come out to the gorge, or if you have been out to the gorge and maybe you can't find all that most up-to-date information of what's closed, what's open, how to prepare, where to go, I wanted to share with you all the Ready, Set, Gorge website. It is the most up-to-date website on all openings and closures and really what's happening out here recreationally and even in the towns. It really helps you prepare, and also how do you care for the gorge while we're in this different phase of our history. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions for you all. And I think Dan will be also joining me on the question and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee and Dan. We actually did have a couple of questions come into us before this started, so we can use those as our warm-up questions. So Renee, what we were wondering is, what was the most challenging component of building the trail? There's so much to it, but what was the most challenging part?
I would say the public outreach was the most challenging and rewarding component of the process. It took the longest. There were times where I literally felt I tried to channel Nancy Russell in that I know that when Nancy was fighting to really establish the National Scenic Area and communities and connecting that to the region, she met a lot of resistance. And so during this process, there were some times where there was a couple of folks that really, that were, oh my goodness, I don't know how to stop all these darn things. I'm gonna stop, sharing. Where it was really it was a difficult process. They had a lot of historical animosity that we had to work through. But in the end, we came up with a process that felt very inclusive and really, I think, let people really feel listened to. And so that, I think, would be my answer to that.
That is so very important. I think that's a perfect example for everything we need to go through, not just with Friends of the Gorge, but going forward. We had another member asking about what were some unexpected outcomes.
I think for the unexpected outcomes were that we ended up kind of a duel. We ended up not, we came in there intending to connect into a town. And so that getting to that place where personally and professionally where we really couldn't make that happen in this round was really disappointing, especially when we first started this process. We did a survey of the entire county, and 76% of people that responded were really supportive of this project. And so I was very surprised, unfortunately, that we lost that connection, like I said, during this round. Also, another positive would be that we also gained a lot of respect in the community in that we took this slow. We didn't come in with this agenda of this is how it's going to be, this is our land, and we're going to do what we are going to do. That we really built more friends and trust in the community during this process.
That's great. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, we actually have a question directed to you, I think it was based on that long list of things that need to be accomplished before you can actually start building. But it mentioned a wildfire prep plan. Yeah. And this seems kind of timely since we're dealing with this right now all around us. So can you tell us more about that?
You bet. That's a great question. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. The Lyle Cherry Orchard is actually closed right now, along with most everything else up in the gorge, because of the wildfire danger and the air quality. But one of the things that we do for all of our properties that have public access and trails is prepare a document. We call it a wildfire response plan. Its primary audience is whether it's the Forest Service or a local fire department, but those first responders. And it's just a few pages, but it does outline everything from our contact information, includes maps of our properties, the gate codes, resources, whether those are natural resources, cultural resources, or what have you, that we'd like to see protected in suppression efforts. And of course, noting that these are open public trails and that the safety of that, anytime something happens and they show up, there is a good likelihood that there will be people on that trail. And so we identify cleared areas, alternate access routes, things like that. So if there were, knock on wood, were to need to be some sort of evacuation of the preserve because of fire, we want the responders to be as informed as possible. So that's a document that we prepare each year. It gets updated. We meet on site with the local fire department officials, give them that document. And our hope is that they use that, carry it around in their truck or whatever. And so that when and if they need to respond to an incident on our property, they can get there efficiently, effectively, and they know what they're going into. Yeah.
All right. Sticky mute button. Anyway, thank you very much, Dan. And we've had two more questions come in, and I guess you both can decide who's more apropos, or maybe it's for both of you. But we had one question about the historical animosities diminishing over time. So are they diminishing over time when you were going through the permitting process?
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think that the proof that they're diminishing or were diminished or addressed was that when you go through the application process before approval, it goes out for public comment 2 different times. Those are 30-day public comment opportunities. And during both of those 30-day comment periods, there were no comments submitted to the Gorge Commission that were against the trail project. If there had been long-lasting issues that had not been addressed that were brought up by those folks that were pretty much set against anything that I said Friends did, it would have definitely come up during that process. And the only comments letters that we actually received were from the county, the Forest Service, and Fish and Wildlife. And those were all just basically in support of that our process was done right. So.
Good, great, thank you. And then finally, we've got, could you please revisit the explanation of why the trail does not connect to Lyle, given the premise of Towns to Trails proposed economic benefits?
I'm happy to jump in there too. So I'll start with the Balfour Road component first. So that is that connects that street that comes to a dead end, actually dead ends on our Friends of the Columbia, on the land trust property. So we felt, well, this is a no-brainer. If the school is now backed out, and I'll address the school second. If the school's backed out, we've got this alternative. So we thought we're good to go. But what ended up happening is that the street has actually, there has been, I'm not going to have the technical term, and Dan maybe jump in if I use the wrong one. I want to say infringement, but it's where people
encroachment.
Encroachment, thank you. Close. They have encroached actually onto the county road lines, and so it became a lot more complicated because the county was actually requesting for us to widen the road to accommodate for more traffic. They were proposing that we would have an average of 25 cars a day, with the idea that more people are coming in the future. We need to look for growth, all of that. They also wanted us to create a parking lot that was paved for fire concerns. They wanted a gate that closed during closure hours. They wanted a toilet. And these were all things they were going to actually demand in their comments if we were actually going to move forward and including that in the application. When looking at all of those requirements that they were requesting that probably the Gorge Commission would then demand to have done, it became completely unfeasible financially for us. We're looking at like literally millions. And so the idea was, how do we continue to explore other connections? And if we'd waited, we decided to phase it. We decided we've got this done. We've got this new system that we can do now. So while we're getting this built, let's work on and continue those conversations to hopefully find a new people involved with the school board, new people involved at the school that want those connections. And actually over the last year, there have been a couple teachers that have been utilizing the, have been utilizing actually the Cherry Orchard and accessing it from the school. So there's a little glimmer of hope there that we can reopen these conversations with the school. I will add that when that was rescinded, the support from the school was when there were, I hate to even say it, but that was when there were a lot of school shootings happening. And so there was this reactive, fear-based response to, we don't want strangers parking on our property because look what's happening around the country. So that explains that connection, and that's pretty brutal down in the weeds, but that's really what happened.
Well, we were looking for down in the weeds. That's why we have our experts here. We had a question in the Q&A portion as opposed to chat, and it was regarding what are those, could you please put up the steps that are required before we can start building. And so if there's a question from that, let me know and I will relay that to Dan. But just for you, Kristen, here you go, in case you have any other things that you'd like to know more about. But you know, I think we are closing in on our time, so it might be easier just to go ahead. If any of y'all who are out there listening want to ask some more questions of Dan or Renee, just like me, our website, you can go to the website, but you can also just email us directly. And just like with mine, it's pam@gorgefriends.org or renee@gorgefriends.org or dan@gorgefriends.org. So I just want to say thank you for being here and continuing your support of all this work, because it is you who makes this possible. So once again, thank you, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. We've got the Terroir of Wine coming up on October 8th, but that's after Evening with Friends on the 1st, and I hope every single one of you is going to be there for that, because that's going to be a big announcement. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.